Right, now can I get to John Rothmann?
The Mark Thompson Show.
He is without peer. When it comes to opining on any number of things, John Rothmann brings the heat every week. The great political historian, John Rothmann, everyone. He has his own podcast, too, which we will funnel our listeners and viewers to, and we will post the name of Around the Political World with John Rothmann throughout our conversation. John, reaction to the thing that's kind of dominated our conversation a bit in the J6 sentencing. Tarrio gets 22 years.
Yeah, and let's be clear. He received 22 years for sedition, for seditious conspiracy. And this is really important. And what people are overlooking is he was not present at the Capitol on January 6th. He was, in fact, in a hotel in Baltimore. Now, the key here is that Donald Trump wasn't present at the Capitol when the insurrection took place. If Tarrio can be cited for seditious conspiracy, well, Donald Trump's in big trouble. Please note that he's not being charged. Trump is not being charged with seditious conspiracy, but he is clearly the person who is on the line for events both before, during, and after. And it's going to be a fascinating adjudication as this moves forward, no doubt.
That's a great point. Adjudication be a ding word. That's a absolutely terrific point that Rothman's making, which is essentially Tarrio is in the same position that Trump is, being prosecuted and actually convicted and sentenced for doing the very things that Trump it's suggested was doing. I mean, half the people involved in depositions and involved in this case point to Trump as having laid down these various strategies or directives. Isn't that your point, John Rothmann?
Let's not forget, Mark, that in the debate that he had with Joe Biden, Donald Trump said, "Proud Boys, stand back and stand by." Now, that's pretty incriminating if you ask me.
And now to other news from that world. Trump continues to scorch all other candidates on the GOP side. He clearly will ride to big victories in the primary. Wouldn't you agree? He'll take all the delegates from California, was the news today, based on recent polling among even independents.
Yeah, it's very disturbing. But I pointed out in one of my podcasts the other day that what appears to be now, that is September, a year and 2 months before the election, anything can change. And a lot of the commentators were saying, well, the election campaign begins on Labor Day, except Labor Day next year is when it starts. We have a long way to go and a lot of issues to be resolved. And so while Donald Trump is ahead right now, which is very concerning to me as a former Republican and who has always believed the Republican Party would emerge in a different direction than Trump, what this says is that the Republicans have got some serious soul searching to do. And the American people are going to hold the Republicans accountable. One way or the other, that's going to happen. Could he lose the nomination? You bet, but you're right. Let me remind you, the decision by the California Republican Party ensures that if Donald Trump wins 50% plus one, he gets all of the California delegates, and that's the largest single group at the convention.
Luis asks, John Rothmann, your opinion on building a new vertical university and soccer stadium in San Francisco. How are you going to address homelessness and mass crime in the city when you are mayor? John Rothmann, come on. How about that, John?
My answer is I oppose the creation of a soccer stadium. What they need to do is to take the University of California, City College of San Francisco, and incorporate into the old Nordstrom site a huge educational complex. There are several reasons for that, but most important of all, it will revitalize the downtown area. A soccer stadium, to me, is a useless boondoggle, and I hope it is roundly defeated.
You see it as a useless boondoggle because you don't see that space necessarily generating the kind of revenue, ripple effect revenue that you would. Okay.
And look, soccer is not a major sport here. The major sport in San Francisco is either football or baseball. Look what we did. We have baseball. Okay, that's here, but football's down the peninsula. This is a very interesting thing. We have to build the infrastructure of the city, not on sporting events, but on putting people in San Francisco in places where they can perform. And if you take a look at City College and you take a look at San Francisco State and you take a look at the University of California, they need more space.
John, the revitalized Embarcadero area, revitalized after the building of the ballpark, you don't see something accompanying that if you were to, as mayor, okay the soccer stadium?
It's not going to be a question of the mayor okaying. I simply think having another sports stadium in San Francisco does not make sense. Okay, maybe on those weekends when you have sporting activities, but how are you going to choose whether to have an activity at a brand new soccer stadium in the heart of downtown or whether to go to the baseball park? I mean, let's be practical. There are real needs and there are businesses. You and I know that. KGO is located in the heart of that downtown area. You've got to have circulation. You got to have people moving. You got to have, frankly, if you have a lot of students, old and young, involved, you're in a lot better shape. And I have not yet decided on the question of running for mayor, although I can tell you it's under active consideration.
We understand that you're not, you're not committing on that because you've already said that you'll announce it on this show. But what I did want to press you on is the fact that, and then we can move on from this, but I mean, there are cities, John, where, there are multiple sports arenas. I mean, Los Angeles is one of them. They've got that SoFi Stadium. They've got.
What's the population of Los Angeles?
Okay, so you're saying it's well in excess of, it's a more spread out area. I would suggest that. It's not even population. It's more spread out. San Francisco is more concentrated. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense.
You're saying there's no infrastructure for all the traffic, all the people. That's not in place. Okay.
Precisely. And by the way, have you been down Market Street lately? All the streets are closed. You've got slow streets. It's crazy. Frankly, putting students there, developing a younger population, and a lot of kids live in the area south of Market because there are apartments that are available. They're expensive apartments. My son was living there until just last month, and it was $3,000 a month for an apartment. Now, let me tell you, I'm thinking very logically here, and I think that using the area of the Embarcadero for educational purposes makes a lot more sense and will bring a far larger constituency to deal with all of those local merchants. If you have a stadium, you got to have all that infrastructure around the stadium, but how much beer and hot dog can you have, for heaven's sake?
Do you slide the kid a little money to cover the $3,000 in rent that he?
No, both my sons have decided they are old enough to pay their own bills. Now, that doesn't mean when we go to Costco, I don't pick up the tab.
Wow. John Rothmann pays for the Costco runs. Very impressive. John, how do you see, let me get back to national politics.
Please.
How do you see this ticket unfolding on the Republican side? Is there a running mate that makes Donald Trump more attractive to independents, or is Donald Trump so third rail that there's no running mate that works?
He's looking at a woman. The two names that are most prominently mentioned are Carrie Lake, who's defeated for governor of Arizona, and I can only describe her as a nutcase, and of course Marjorie Taylor Greene and her laser beams from outer space. Frankly, people don't vote for a vice president; they vote for a president. And so the vice presidential running mate theoretically should add something. But in the case of Donald Trump, he will be, if he is on the ballot, he will be the one person everyone is concentrating on. You're either going to be for or against Donald Trump. As for the question of his being ruled off ballots because of the proposal by Larry Tribe, among others,
from Crew
and Judge Luttig, the question becomes, it will go to the Supreme Court. It will be a Supreme Court decision. And you are correct, Mark. You made the right call. It is a state-by-state call, and there will be states that are going to challenge whether or not Donald Trump should be allowed on the ballot. My own view is that it will have far more substance if there is a conviction. That's just my own view. But what the Supreme Court does, who knows? And by the way, people who said, I heard somebody earlier emailed into you, and I listened to the show avidly. I want you to know that. And I urge people to spread the word and subscribe. subscribe is the key point here. But I heard somebody say earlier, they were talking about whether or not the court cases, if they're decided state by state, will make a difference. And the answer is yes. You want to be on the ballot in all 50 states in order to be a real contender for the presidency. And we know that in some states, they will do everything they can to knock Donald Trump off the ballot. But this is part of the political process. I'm more worried right now about third-party candidates. I'm more worried about No Labels, which has announced they're going to hold a national convention, I believe in March, and they're going to theoretically nominate a candidate for president.
Yeah, they have Larry Hogan and guys who are viewed GOP potential candidates who are far more sort of moderate by GOP standards.
But who's backing this thing? The Trump people are backing it. It's being paid for by Trump people. Why? Because they know that if the opposition can be splintered, that Trump has a better shot. I'm not opposed to a third party, although I hasten to point out that the last third party candidate for president to be elected was Abraham Lincoln in 1860. And I can give you a whole dissertation on third parties because it's a very important question. We saw the implications in 2000 with Ralph Nader and Pat Buchanan on the ballot in Florida. And although people say it wouldn't have made any difference, of course it would have made a difference. And anybody who has any political sense knows that. So for the Democrats, the question of unity is going to be critical. I was asked in a conversation earlier today what I thought of Kamala Harris. She will be the Democratic nominee for vice president. Joe Biden wants her there, and she wants to be there. And that's the way it is. And then the question becomes, and you've heard particularly several of the Republican candidates talk about the fact that, well, if you vote for Biden, you're really voting for Kamala Harris for president. And everybody should be aware a vice president is a heartbeat away from the presidency. So we'll see.
I think you're making such an important point because the arithmetic is really quite simple. A third-party candidate, regardless of who it is, would siphon support from the Democrats. It would not siphon support from Trump. Trump's support is unsiphonable. He is...
You're spot on. That's exactly the point. And whether it's from the left or the right, it's a serious question. And I have to tell you, I'm terrified of the idea that Donald Trump could be president of the United States again. Here's a man who talked about suspending the Constitution. He doesn't have the power to do it, but he can certainly cause disruption. This is a man who has said, and this is critical, he's talking about weaponizing the Justice Department. He's going to go after his enemies. He is going to destroy his opposition. Well, let me tell you, I worked for a president who tried to weaponize the Justice Department, and thank God he failed. That was Richard Nixon. And all I can tell you is the minute Donald Trump went on the record saying he would weaponize the Justice Department and that he would prosecute and persecute his political enemies, the American people should sit up and take note. That's not the kind of person you want in the White House. And I don't care if it's a Democrat, a Republican, a liberal, or conservative. You just don't want that in a president of the United States.
The narrative somehow that Biden is not up to the job, they keep talking about his age. I get it. And by the way, to be fair, they talk about Trump not being up to the job for other reasons, although there's not a big gap in their ages. But
3 years between them, 3 years.
Yeah, so it's and as I've mentioned before, Harrison Ford is 81. Is anybody saying, he should never have done the last Indiana Jones film? No,
but he had a double in that film, as you know.
Well, he had double for some scenes, but the guy still has to show up at the set every day. I mean,
No, of course, and it depends. Look, age is a serious question. And Joe Biden is going to have to address that, as any candidate for president has to address it. When are you too old? And I can only tell you, knowing Joe Biden as I do over many, many years, I know he wants to run again, but one of his biographers said yesterday on one of the networks that if push comes to shove, he may decide not to run. Were that to happen, the Democratic field would be wide open, but Kamala Harris would certainly have the edge because she would have the endorsement of the president. So, we have to wait and see how that turns out. But let me tell you, I have no idea where we're going to be a year from now. I don't even have any idea where we'll be 5 months from now, because
Yeah, it is early. We always take the temperature of the water a little bit early and sort of make a bunch of pronouncements based on that temperature.
talk to President Muskie,
Yeah.
who was a shoo-in for the Democratic nomination. And by the way, when you think about this, in 2015 at this time, Donald Trump had just come down the escalator a few weeks before. Who would have imagined he would win the nomination for the presidency of the United States? The great thing about politics, and why I enjoy doing my podcast Around the Political World with John Rothman, is because it's always new. Every morning there is something else that hits you. Did you catch the big story yesterday, which wasn't Donald Trump? It was the secretaries of the Air Force, Navy, and Army giving public testimony and writing a op-ed for the Washington Post denouncing Senator Tuberville and saying without any hesitation that the senator, by blocking these nominations, is helping our adversaries. That should be front page news. That should be what we're talking about.
He's blocked 300 of these promotions, and John is right. These statements were made publicly, and it's odd that I think this is where I get to that media and politics and, what media decides to cover. If media doesn't cover it, it is a tree falling in the forest and nobody's around to hear it. It just does not get any play. This guy is truly holding up some serious aspects of the evolution of our military.
He's helping our adversaries, in the words of the secretaries of 3 departments. And he's doing it to own the libs on the issue of women's reproductive health. Right.
That's it.
And so this is unconscionable. And the Republican Party should be less concerned about Mitch McConnell's health than they are with Tuberville's interference with the health of the United States of America.
Here is Luis, who will finish us out with this is a super chat. Big shout out. Thank you, Luis, for this.
Big shout out.
John Rothman is an intellectual beast, the likes of Godzilla. His analysis is on mark, and his historical framing is without equal, my friend.
I want people to note the most positive line in that. It's on mark. I appear on the Mark Thompson program for that very reason. And by the way, I hope people spread the word, because for your program, for my podcast, unless people tune in, it is as if a tree is falling in a forest and there's nobody around to hear it. So I hope, and I am happy to plug you, Mark, because I believe it's so important. So you're right. I am on the mark. Your caller was absolutely right on the Mark Thompson program.
I love my Rothman. John Rothman's podcast is Around the Political World with John Rothman. Find it, subscribe, enjoy, and you can catch him here on Wednesdays. John, have a great week, and thanks for being part of things.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, pal.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.